Why are kids these days so lazy at work? Multiple surveys show that a large share of hiring managers and coworkers openly criticize Gen Z. One industry study found 45% of hiring managers say Gen Z is the most difficult generation to manage. 36% admit to age bias against Gen Z candidates. It's obvious that these sentiments are what feed the headlines like why is Gen Z hated in the workplace, but what really lies behind that backlash? Are Gen Zers uniquely problematic, or are we just seeing a classic case of generational misunderstanding? Every generation complains about young people, observed one marketer. Boomers griped about Gen X, the slackers. Gen X dissed millennials, the entitled. And now millennials and older workers grumble about Gen Z. As one campaign for a Dutch recruitment firm bluntly put it, every generation complains about young people. I've never seen it happen as much as I do now. Throughout history, older workers have often cast aspirations on the youth, blaming them for slacking off, lacking respect, or changing the norms. Today's generational strife in the workplace just happens to coincide with some unique social and economic situations, so tensions are inevitable. But before judging, it's helpful to know who Gen Z actually is. Demographers generally define Gen Z as those born roughly between 1997 to 2012. Kids who grew up on smartphones, social media, and instant access to information. Gen Z already makes up over a quarter of the population and will soon be the largest living generation. Growing up in the shadow of the 2008 financial crisis, some analysts expected Gen Z to be very cautious and risk averse, but in reality, they're very ambitious and pragmatic. One Deloitte study notes that Gen Z is radically different than millennials in how they define success. They care about stability as many saw their parents struggle in 2008, but they also value purpose and impact. About 89% say a sense of purpose or mission at work is important to their job satisfaction. In other words, Gen Z often judges an employer on their values or their mission. They almost care about that as much as pay. Emphasis on the almost, I think most people would take pay over the mission or values. And maybe it's a little naive to think that you'll be able to find a company that has a mission or a value that you agree with. But several historical trends have shaped Gen Z's attitudes, which helps explain the culture clash. For one, the Great Recession in 2008 hit just as older Gen Zers were entering middle school or high school. They saw adults struggle with unemployment and housing debt, and as one Gen Z marketing executive bluntly noted, where boomers once could buy a house on a single salary, today's young people struggle with even two average incomes. But the 2008 financial crisis was just the beginning of Gen Z's economic struggles. This economic squeeze has made Gen Z value job security and very skeptical that work will automatically pay off if you just put some time into it. And this is really clear with the larger companies in Silicon Valley just laying off tens of thousands of people. It's showing my generation, and quite frankly, everybody, that just because you put in years at a company, just because you work really hard, you're just a number to them. And when we run into a situation at a job where we don't feel valued, it makes us rethink whether we really should be working there or not. Let's just look at the facts here. An employer needs a worker just as much as a worker needs an employer. And with the declining quality of life, it makes sense that a lot of my generation is asking for a lot. 59% of Gen Z feels stressed or anxious about money, far higher than 29% of other generations who report the same level of financial stress. This isn't just typical young adult money concerns, it's a systemic crisis. About 51% are living paycheck to paycheck. This financial pressure fundamentally changes workplace behavior. When you're one emergency away from financial disaster, having traditional workplace loyalty just becomes a luxury that you really can't afford. When Generation Z has been pummeled by rising prices, housing costs, student loans, food, and way more debt than any other generation, suddenly their focus on compensation makes a lot of sense. They're not being entitled, they're being rational about surviving in an economy that's structurally different than what generations before have dealt with coming into adulthood. Gen Z has witnessed rapid technological change as well. They learned on tablets and laptops, adapted to social media, and now expect artificial intelligence to replace their entry level positions. However, a heavy reliance on digital life also means they missed out on some pivotal in person experiences. COVID-19 lockdown struck just as many Gen Zers were graduating from high school and college, so their entry into the workforce and into higher education was highly disrupted. Internships, professor mentoring, and collaboration was either entirely eliminated or it went virtual overnight. As a result, many young employees missed out entirely on the post college work experience previous generations took for granted, such as face to face onboarding and networking. Gen Z started work with way fewer hard skills and social skills than older managers expected because their training and entry into adulthood took place over Zoom. Understanding Gen Z's priorities in the workplace sheds some light onto this clash with older generations. Nearly 9 in 10 Gen Zers say having a sense of purpose or meaning at work is very important. Many want employers aligned with social, economic, or environmental causes and who act ethically. About 65% describe themselves as eager to learn. Career development and mentorship rank among the top job motivators. Only 36% say that their manager teaches and mentors them, versus 50% who say they do want it. Leaders need to be mentors. I think that's kind of been lost. The mentorship that used to happen, we don't get that anymore. And if you truly care about the success of a company, then you would want to put in the support and provide that help to younger employees. They're going to be carrying the torch in the future. So it's in your best interest to make them the best that they can. Gen Zers put a premium on work life balance. For example, 32% of Gen Z workers rank work life balance as their number one priority, and this share is much lower in the older generations. But most of us just want a flexible schedule and some leeway. Most of Gen Z wants some alternative to the 5 week in office, and I think that's fair if your job allows for something to be done on a computer at home. An employer should have that conversation with the employees to get that set up. And this is something we've talked about before, the death of remote jobs. And at the end of the day, it is up to the company to decide whether they're in office or not. But there's an overwhelming amount of studies saying that worker morale and satisfaction, work life balance, all of these, and productivity, all of these are increased with some amount of work from home. This desire for work from home, especially from my generation, comes from the fact that we were on Zoom for years at school. I think half of my college experience, if not more, was over Zoom. So we've seen that work can be done anywhere. Growing up in the digital age, Gen Z instinctively uses tech for collaboration and innovation, and this is obviously a strength. Many younger employees adapt quickly to new tech, but that can cause some friction with managers who are maybe slower to adopt other ways of doing something. And when workplaces will often clash with these ideals, that's where the generational misunderstanding occurs. Some of these concerns reflect younger employees' focus on work life balance and very direct communication. And these traits are often interpreted by older generations as lazy or entitled, but it's really just a different approach to work, a different style. What's really ironic about this whole clash between Gen X, boomers, millennials, and Gen Z is that these generations are our parents. When they talk about a generation as a whole, you're talking about your kids and kind of a self report on your own generation's parenting skills. And if the deficiencies of this generation are as severe as the critics suggest, then further analysis would point us to structural factors that are producing these outcomes instead of just blatantly attributing it to Gen Z and generational differences. It's funny how Gen Z is somehow operating in a vacuum where the generation itself is the problem and we're not the product of outside experiences and the environment. The whole nature versus nurture concept is kind of lost on them when it comes to being able to put blame on an entire generation. And I think generally Gen Z's hopes for the future are running on fumes right now. There's just not a ton to look forward to following down the same path that we are right now, economically, politically. it's hard to understand that other generations can't understand what we're feeling right now. So let's have some introspection and just avoid jumping to rash conclusions. I really hope that's something that we can change. And that comes with time, that comes with sitting at the table and having these conversations. They need to be had. And if we don't, then the problem is just going to keep brewing and potentially get worse. Closing the gap is a two-way street. And the sooner that we can do that and understand each other, we can react accordingly. And that will be the success of everybody involved and the company. Let's not jump to blame older generations just as they may do to us. You know, they inherited a system and are just continuing what they've learned through their adulthood. Put our best foot forward and try to understand other perspectives. If you have another perspective on this issue, I would love to hear it in the comments. I'm open for dialogue here. But if you liked the video, consider subscribing for more breakdowns like this. So, anyways, take care.